And we are live.
Awesome. Thanks for having me back.
Hey, Christopher.
Hey, we were just talking. It's been, this is like my third or fourth time doing this, probably fourth time, right?
It's your fourth time hanging out with
Yeah.
me.
And it was
But you
what?
keep coming back, so you
Uh,
must be having fun.
Absolutely. So I think the first time we talked was before To Sleep in a Sea of Stars was actually released.
It was.
Yeah.
And I
And
forget what year that was.
2020.
Was it a 2020 release?
Yeah, 2020. That's because I wanted Fractal Noise to come out 2021, I think. Was To Sleep 2020 or was it
Maybe it
2021?
was 2019. Was it?
No, it was not
No?
2019.
Okay.
It was not 2019. Um,
It
oh,
was
maybe when
solidly.
we talked, it was 2019. But yeah, we were chatting before the interview that I actually told you the title of Murtagh long before it got publicly announced. So you've been sitting on that juicy little tidbit for a while.
And I've been sitting on the first line of the book, but I guess it's not the first line anymore. It's
Mm-mm.
the first line of.
It's now the first line of the second or third chapter. Yeah, yeah.
See, so
Would you
I'm
would you
now.
like to hear the first line of the book, the current
Yeah,
first line of the
please.
book?
I think everybody wants to hear the first line of Murtagh.
Well, it's not a particularly thrilling one compared with some of the ones I've written in the past. I think my favorite first line from the Inheritance cycle is actually um, Eldest, which is "The songs of the dead are the lamentations of the living." I rather like that, but
I like that one too. That one's hardcore.
no, the first line of Murtagh is from Thorn, so you have to imagine a dragon saying this, but it's "Will you go alone?"
Ooh.
And of course, there is a reason that is the first line.
Well, it's gotta be talking about a separation, but I'm not gonna speculate. Logic would tell me that anyway.
Yes. Well, I mean, it wouldn't be a story if Murtagh didn't get himself into some sort of trouble.
Exactly. And that's coming out in November, right?
November 7th, along with the 20th anniversary illustrated edition of Eragon, which has over 50 full color paintings and illustrations. The whole book is in color, and it's not just a regular book sized book, it is like an art book. It's
Like a
big,
coffee table
yeah,
book.
coffee table book. The text is in 2 columns, biblical style. Um, it looks amazing. I haven't seen the finished book. I've seen the finished art and the finished design, and it's jaw dropping. So the artist Siddharth did a really cool job. He was actually a fan of the books when he was growing up, so he was very excited about, I guess, in his own words, doing some justice to things that, for example, the film wasn't able to touch on.
That's amazing. Imagine growing up with Eragon and getting to be able to do the illustrations for the 20th anniversary book. That's
Yeah.
just insane. And it's crazy to think that you have had readers grow up
Hmm.
and fully follow you.
I mean,
For
if you were 16 when Aragon came out, you're 36 now, so
I am, thank you. I was 16 and I am now 36. That is correct.
yeah, well, I'm going to be 40 this year, so and I am going to turn 40 while on book tour for Murtagh.
Okay, but they better give you a cake though.
Maybe. But I actually might. What actually might be happening on my birthday is an event with Terry Brooks and Tad Williams, which is pretty cool.
Oh, you just Terry Brooks and Ted Williams. No
Yeah,
big
yeah,
deal
yeah.
for your
That
birthday.
and I grew up reading them, so it's the circle of fandom.
The very first high fantasy novel I ever read was The Sword of Shannara.
Ah, for me, it was David Eddings, and then it was Raymond Feist, and then it was Tad Williams.
Okay, but Raymond Feist, people sleep on nowadays. Nobody
They
reads
really
Raymond
do.
Feist,
Well,
and he's amazing.
I think part of it is he wrote so many books in his world that people sometimes forget how good the first set of books in that world were. And of course, and I'm not the first person to say this, the trilogy that he co-authored with Janny Wirtz, the Empire trilogy, is fantastic. Now, I'm saying that not having read it in a long time, but I think I even reread it. It was so good. It really, really good. But no, Feist is so Eddings tilts a lot younger, and he's not Harry Potter young, but he's definitely on the younger side of fantasy. And then especially with the Belgariad. But then Feist is like that perfect in between where it's definitely a little more mature, but it's not going so far as like Tad Williams or George R. R. Martin. And Tad is verging on George R. R. Martin territory, although he's not as grim, at least in the original Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I haven't read the new trilogy yet. I'm gearing up for that. It's not a trilogy anymore, but the new series.
It's still a very exciting way to be spending your birthday.
Yes, well, I spent my 30th birthday watching Waiting for Godot with Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen. So I've been fortunate to have some unique birthdays for the decade, the changes from the decade. What, there's got to be a word for that, decadal. I don't know.
I mean, yeah,
The
you're the
decade
author.
changes. I don't. Well, I need a thesaurus sometimes.
What was that like, your 30th birthday? Was that one of the more surreal moments of your life?
No, no.
Oh,
I've
so
had
it was a Tuesday then.
No, it wasn't. It definitely wasn't a Tuesday. It was a memorable day, but I've had some weird experiences with this whole publishing experience, especially starting so young.
Okay, top 3.
Sitting at the movie premiere next to Robert Carlyle. That's one. Having Eragon debut on the New York Times list. That's definitely top 3. And there's almost too many others that would compete for that third spot, some of which I can't mention in public. So, yeah, I don't know. There's too many to compete for number 3.
And some, I'm assuming, to come.
I would
Something could
hope so.
topple one of
I
those.
would hope so. That's right.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think
well,
there's some stuff coming.
there's definitely some
You
stuff.
can't talk about it, but
No. Well, for those who don't know, Disney Plus is adapting Eragon as a big budget live action television show. We're very, very early in the process, but hopefully once the writer's strike in Hollywood dies down, we'll be able to move forward with full steam with that. Also, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars is under development also. That's been moving very slowly, but it is moving. And I have a lot more books to write, so and some young kids. So there's no sleep going on.
no, you can sleep later.
Yeah.
You have stuff to conquer, Christopher. With Fractal Noise, I was telling you before the chat that
which comes out Tuesday.
It comes out on Tuesday. And if you have not pre-ordered it, please do so, because pre-orders are the most important.
Yeah.
And,
they actually, I'm going to pause you there for a second. I think most people don't realize actually how much pre-orders matter, because pre-orders actually used to be a really big thing. And nowadays with same-day delivery, a lot of people don't pre-order, which is fine. You do you. It's not that big of a deal. But if you do pre-order, it sends a very strong message to the publisher that not only do you want to read the book, but you're enthusiastic about this author. And it actually really does affect the publisher's calculation of, how much people love this author and how many resources they're going to put into publishing the book. So pre-orders do actually make a difference for authors you enjoy.
they absolutely do. And this one especially. So this is considered a Fractalverse novel.
Yes.
But it's not, it is a prequel, but it's not a prequel. It stands entirely on its own.
Mm-hmm.
And for anybody who might be intimidated about the size of To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, this one has no spoilers. And I feel like it's a really good introduction to your world of sci-fi.
Which is interesting to hear, given that I wrote it before To Sleep and held off on publishing it because I felt like To Sleep would be a better introduction for the world. So maybe I should have just finished off Fractal Noise back in the day. But to be fair, I don't think I had the personal experience needed to make the changes necessary to Fractal Noise to get it into a publishable shape back when I wrote the first draft.
It's interesting that you say that, because this book centers on humanity and philosophy and a lot of really heavy topics. And it's more of a thriller than I would consider a typical sci-fi, which makes it that much more interesting. Because as you know, I went into this book completely blind. I read it on my flight to California.
Awesome.
And I was like, oh, this isn't this isn't what I expected, but this is a lot of fun. And, can you tell us a little bit more about the Fractalverse itself and
Sure.
Fractal Noise?
So the Fractalverse is this science fiction universe I've created that includes the far future, the distant past, and the present day. So Earth as we know it exists in the Fractalverse. Everyone on Earth exists in the Fractalverse, and I did this because, and I put a lot of effort into developing the setting, especially down the line in the future as technology changes, because I wanted a place to tell stories that aren't fantasy. So I have my fantasy world. I have the world of Eragon. I have Alagasia. But if I want to write something that's not in that world, well, I mean, I can set it in every day. In that, I can set it in modern times. I can set it in the future, whatever. But I wanted something that kind of tied all of those stories together, and thus the Fractalverse was born. And it took. I mean, we've talked about this before. It took a year and a half solid of research to create the technology, the philosophy that sort of underpins what I'm doing in this Fractalverse. So To Sleep in a Sea of Stars is set about, I'm forgetting the exact dates here, but about 250 years in the future. And then Fractal Noise is set 23 years prior to Sleep. And there are no shared characters between the two. However, Fractal Noise sort of concerns humanity's first discovery of the first evidence of intelligent alien life in the Milky Way. And of course, that's not really what the story is about. That's the setting. That's the event that occurs. But the actual story is centered around the characters, and specifically the main character, Alex Crichton, who's a xenobiologist, who actually does sort of serve as a inspirational hero for the main character of To Sleep in a Sea of Stars down the road. But Alex is part of a survey team that is surveying a solar system for potential colonization, and they discover a giant hole on one of the planets, and it's 50 kilometers wide and perfectly round and extremely deep, and has a few other weird properties. So for various reasons, they can't land any, bots or drones near the hole. So they put a couple of people on the planet, and those people have to trudge on foot over to investigate the artifact. And since I wouldn't have a story otherwise, it does not go particularly well. So I don't think I'm spoiling anything by saying that.
I don't think you're spoiling anything, and a lot of that is covered in this synopsis, although said a little bit more eloquently, so thank you for that. Um, but what made you want to center the discovery of an artifact around a hole? Because it seems so mundane, yet terrifying.
How spoilery is how deep into the spoilers are we getting? Because I have the
Let's
answer.
go 30%. Let's touch on it without spoiling it completely for folks.
I'm also deciding how much I want to actually like pull back the curtain on what I'm doing in this
Okay.
book. But let's put it this way: a lot of what's terrifying for some people about the universe and space is the amount of emptiness out there. You know, it's the fear of the unknown, it's the fear of the dark, the fear of the void. The main character is dealing with a personal loss, which is what his emotional journey revolves around. And what is loss but an absence, a hole in your life?
Okay, I see
And
what you did
so
there.
it's as simple as that. Also, as I said in the afterword, the core idea for this story didn't start with the main character. It started with a weird dream I had back in 2011 when I was finishing Inheritance, and the first half of the dream was all sorts of. I dreamt I was in this overgrown like Pacific Northwest forest, and there were all these weird creatures in it, and all of those creatures pretty much ended up in Inheritance. That's where I got the shadow birds and the burrow grubs and the angler frogs from. And then the second half of the dream was I just saw this planet out in space with this hole on it and these people trudging along to it, and the hole was emitting this huge blast every so many seconds. And as with so many dreams, there was this intense emotion attached to the image and the procession of the figures. And so as soon as I woke up, I grabbed my notebook and wrote it down. I was like, "There's a story there."
And then it grew over time.
It definitely grew like a fungus.
How do you approach re-exploring the past, because it's 23 years prior to the events of To Sleep,
Hmm.
while knowing what the future events are? Or was it made easier because you wrote it first?
Well, when I wrote Fractal Noise, I had not fully developed the Fractalverse in terms of some of the technology, some of the political environment. And then when I went on and worked on To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, I really did develop a heck of a lot more. So that actually was helpful then coming back to Fractal Noise because it immediately solved some of the things I've been working on because I was like, I already have these answers. Um, there really wasn't too much work in that regard because the technology hasn't changed that much. Like in terms of the spaceship, the spaceships get a little more efficient, the space drives get a little more efficient, but the technology doesn't change that much. And since most of the events take place in one solar system in this book, I didn't have to really deal with that. Probably the biggest difference between the two books is that the discovery of this artifact in Fractal Noise is the catalyst for this massive political governmental change that we see the results of into Sleep. That basically once humans know that, okay, we have definitive proof we're not alone, these aliens are probably more capable than we are because of this artifact we found. We can infer that we have to get our crap together, as a species to prepare for potentially encountering these aliens, and that's what we see the effects of then in To Sleep.
Now, you'd mentioned technology and future tech. I think a lot of readers might not realize how much time and energy you've spent talking to experts in their fields about the possibilities of future technology. What new technologies were you most excited to research when it came to fractal noise?
Mm,
Or did you already have the notes?
most of it was done at the same time when I was researching for To Sleep. Um, but one of the things I did look into a little bit more was like the actual possible development of spacesuits. Actually, the characters spend a lot of time in what they call skin suits, because the spacesuits we have now are inflated, so they have positive pressure around the whole body. That's the way they all look, like the Marshmallow Man or the Michelin Man. They're all puffy because they're basically balloons, and it means that it's incredibly hard to like bend your arms, bend your legs. It takes a ton of effort. Like spacewalks are actually incredibly exhausting, and there's a potential of making suits that instead are just glommed right onto your skin. Not with adhesive or anything, but they are just right against your skin. Don't have to be inflated, but are insulated enough to still protect you from the vacuum or can help shed the heat either way. And so I did a lot of research into that, and I actually met, and I'm forgetting his name now. It was this guy who I think led one of the expeditions that went to like the deepest cave in the world, and he had worked with NASA to help the development of future space suits. And because a lot of the equipment used for cave diving, especially when you have to go underwater, is very similar to what's used, for space. And talking with him got me thinking about this. This was years ago, and that's what got me started on that line of research. One of the big things I researched for the Fractalverse that I'm sort of as a hot topic right now is, of course, AI. And I'm going to rant here just for 1 second because I became really convinced during the research that true artificial intelligence, that is, uh, artificially sentient creature that is sentient the way humans are, is a heck of a lot harder to produce than most people think. Which is why in the Fractalverse we don't have true AI. So what we call AI now, I call a pseudo intelligence. That's what Chat GPT is. It fakes intelligence and it lies when it'll make stuff up because it doesn't actually understand what it's saying. So I don't think that we're going to have true artificial intelligence, but I could be wrong. The real world loves to, whenever you say something can never be done, sometimes the universe likes to smack you down for that. So, but I think that true artificial intelligence is something we're not actually going to get for a long time.
And with To Sleep, it's only a couple of hundred years in the future.
Yeah.
True AI would reasonably take a very long time to develop,
Yes, and or
if ever.
it's possible that intelligence as we know it is so intricately linked to the structure of our brains that to replicate intelligence, you have to essentially replicate the physical structure of the brain. And we don't really understand that at the moment. Like, how do these atoms in our brain result? How do these atoms know about themselves? And and
Well,
how would
now I'm uncomfy.
yeah, because we just have atoms and molecules in our head, just
Mhm.
like any other part of our body, and yet somehow awareness arises out of them. And we don't really understand that mechanism. And thus, trying to replicate that awareness in inorganic material inside of a computer when we don't understand it in our own brains, again, that's the bit where it seems way harder to do than a lot of people think.
Hearing you speak about that as well, in the book, there are 2 characters who pop off on each other near
Yes.
constantly, Talia and Pushkin, and they have very similar arguments
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how humans got here and what powers humans, and it's just really funny to hear you speak about that because I can see the duality kind of within yourself. "Well, maybe, but how? Well, maybe, but how?" And I can almost hear you arguing with yourself as you're writing the
Oh
novel.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. Trust me, it's not schizophrenia, it's fiction.
Do they come to life in your head, though, your characters?
On a good day. On bad
Okay,
days,
okay.
I feel like I'm having to artificially, construct whatever's going on. But on a good day, my brain's in the game. I have a good understanding of where each character is, and then they're just playing with each other. I say playing, but it could be very intense.
Some of it involves swords and dragons. Um, are there any characters you feel and aside from Eragon, 'cause, we're gonna shelve that. Are there any characters that come that much more easily to you?
Well, in To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, I don't know what this says about me, but Grigorovich, I could probably
Okay.
I could write 300 pages of stream of consciousness Grigorovich and not even break a sweat.
Where is
Uh,
it?
it,
Grigorovich is
it
amazing.
it's in my head.
Okay.
Grigorovich is probably the closest to me of any of the characters in To Sleep. So, um,
Really?
yeah, I could write Grigorovich all day long.
I think you should.
I'm trying to find a story that will let me just go gonzo with the main character because it's a common problem where people say the side characters are more interesting than the main character, and I think that's because authors know they can let go a little bit with the side characters. There are different constraints on a side character versus a main character, but I'm looking for a story idea where I can let go with the main character. I think that'd be fun.
Almost like a comedy dramedy would be very funny.
Maybe. Oh, that
Now
sort
that
of character.
you are a true blue established sci-fi author, you can be silly. You're allowed it.
I actually have a story about a punomancer I want to write. So it's not
Really.
sci-fi, but it's fan. Yes, I'm going to write it to annoy all of my editors and my agent.
Are you just gonna self-publish?
No, no, it'll get published, but it's going to force everyone to actually read bad puns. So the idea is that I have this magician, and his magic, his spells only work when they're phrased as puns.
Please, I need this.
And the
We
worse,
need
and
this.
and the worse the pun is, the better the spell works.
Oh my gosh, stop it. No,
But
that's
but but
that's
here's his fatal
needed.
weakness. Here's his fatal weakness. If he can't make, let's say he's facing off against a monster, if he can't make his opponent laugh, the spell won't work.
Please write this just to annoy everyone in fantasy.
Okay, no one else is allowed to write this, please. I've been sitting on this one and I really want to write it.
I don't think there's anybody else capable of writing that. I think you're good. Attempts will not be made. Let's talk a little bit about my surprise about this being a thriller novel. Um, How did you manage to infuse that building sense of dread in this book to give the writer a classic thriller-esque rush while bringing together all of these sci-fi elements?
Um, I'm glad you feel that way. I've seen a couple of early reviewers who felt the book dragged like crazy, and then I've seen other reviewers who thought that it's just like this pounding, heart-pounding race to the end. Which just goes to show everyone has a different reading experience. But I was going for the experience that you just outlined. I think a lot of it has to do with the structure of the story. Um, I mean, if we're going to get technical here,
Mhm.
the journey that they're on is divided into sections, and it's very clear, hopefully, to the readers that what their goal is, what section of the journey they're on. We even have a map, a couple of images. I painted a number of images for the book, and to me, as a reader and as a writer, it feels like that helps draw you through the story. You know where you are, you know what your goal is. If you can just get that next step, that next chunk of your journey, and then of course you have to look at the pacing, and then technically throughout the book, I use this device of we hear the reverberation from the whole, which increases as we get closer to the whole, and that really just ramps up in a way that um, adds to that tension. And I have to say that Tor actually did an amazing job with the audiobook. If anyone watching is interested in audiobooks, I think this book might actually work better as an audiobook than in print. Jennifer Hale did it. Also, she returned to read the book as she read to sleep, and one of my fans, Malta, did some beautiful and eerie music for each of the sections of the book, and then we have these sound effects throughout. I mean, it's like a movie, the audiobook. So that's a fun way to experience it.
I've had a number of people comment that they loved Jennifer Hale in it, and
Yeah,
To Sleep for that reason as well.
yeah, it was
Super
interesting, and I had
excited.
I had a couple of people say that I should get someone else to read Fractal Noise because the main character is a man. But to me, there's no other voice for the Fractalverse than Jennifer Hale, and she has. I mean, she can read male, female, doesn't matter. Um, so I feel quite lucky to have her reading these books.
Yeah, I didn't feel like anything from Alex would have been taken away from a female voice.
No,
Um, Speaking of Alex, the backgrounds, the characters, and their motives play a significant it is the story. Significant role. It is the story.
yeah.
Um, was there anything in particular that motivated you to write the story of Alex? Was it a personal experience? Because it felt like a personal story.
Mm. Yes. Um, I mean, but maybe not in the way you're thinking.
Mhm.
So, like I said, Alex is dealing with loss and the loss of someone close to him, which coincidentally enough, so was Kira in To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. But I find it a very interesting question. How do we deal with things that are out of our control in our everyday lives? Because there's a lot that's out of our control, and sometimes it's wonderful, and sometimes it's absolutely devastating. And how we deal with that is one of the great questions of life. It's been one of the great questions of religion, for example. In fact, I would go so far as to say Fractal Noise is a novel that can only really be written in a more secular society, because the question of that Alex is grappling with is how to function in um, a seemingly uncaring universe, that can inflict this sort of loss. And in a very religious society, the answer is clear. It's faith. It's religion. It's putting your trust in God. But in a more secular society, you have to look for a different answer, and that's what he's wrestling with. And so, personally, I find uh, exactly that question and what he's dealing with. It's not necessarily spurred by any loss I've had. It's just spurred by the fact of being alive and aware of this reality. And then through the fiction, I find my own explanations and I grapple with the various sides of the problem and attempt to answer it to my satisfaction. Although in this case, I already had my answer. I knew where I was starting from. I knew what my position was. It was more a question of putting the characters through the ringer um, so that they could learn. And not that they needed to learn my position, but so they could learn what was necessary for them to live and function. All of which is to say, that's sort of the deep level stuff I was thinking about. It's still a sci-fi story. There's
It's
action,
still fun.
there's adventure. I don't want to turn people off by making it sound like it's a philosophical treatise.
And it's definitely not. There's quite a lot of action, but I particularly enjoy that it was balanced with the bigger questions because, of course, if you're traveling the universe and you find a giant perfect hole in the ground, you're gonna grapple with those same questions too. I don't think
Yeah,
anybody would be able to come upon a marvel like that without questioning exactly who and where they are in the universe.
absolutely.
And that's what I loved about this. But it was very actiony, and it would lend very well to a movie if one were perhaps ever to be made.
I agree. I actually think it's more suited to a film than to Sleep. Actually, it's more cohesive.
It's linear too. I
Yes,
feel like it would be really very, heart pounding,
definitely good.
literally.
Definitely good. Give those Dolby speakers a workout.
Um, were any of the characters more easy for you to write than the others?
Yeah, Alex was actually really easy.
Yeah.
Um, Probably because I wasn't in the best frame of mind when I wrote the first draft after finishing the inheritance cycle. So, uh, I kind of got that out of my system by writing the book. Pushkin was really easy because he's like a second cousin to Grigorovich in terms of characters. Um, Actually, the hardest character to write was this character called Chen, who's a biologist,
Mhm.
chemist. Um,
Chemist.
because I don't want to say he's a non-character, but he has to use an analogy, a very pale character. And so it required careful balancing to maintain that and hopefully be a little bit realistic.
And you could tell sometimes the unsaid conflict between the other characters and Chen because
Yeah.
you just want this poor character to take a stand on anything. And
Yeah.
I feel like he might be the most neutral point of view I've experienced in a long time. I'm like, "Oh, okay. Chen" okay, for anybody watching, Chen is just straight vibing this whole time.
Yeah. He's not signing up to any agenda or any particular point of view.
He's very much like, "Okay, I'm here now. This is happening.
Which is
Everything's fine."
surprisingly hard to write. So weirdly enough, like you'd think that would be easy to write. It's not easy to write. I think because I myself always prefer to take action in any situation. Like if I feel there's a problem, I want to do something about it. And to write a character who perhaps doesn't always do that is it just makes me want to like rip my fingernails off. So
I
that
love
that
that.
was tough.
Um, somebody asked, "To sleep is already was already heart pounding. Is it more heart pounding than to sleep?" Yes.
Yeah, substantially more.
Yeah. Like I said, it's much more thriller and less adventure, which is what I would call To
Mm.
Sleep. To Sleep is more of like a goal-oriented adventure
Yeah,
sci-fi.
To Sleep is an epic quest
Yes.
space opera, and
Mhm.
Fractal Noise is much more of a bottle drama in some ways.
Fractal Noise is like the dagger, and To Sleep is the sword.
or as the analogy I used on Twitter was that To Sleep in a Sea of Stars is a banquet, and
Oh,
Fractal
yes.
Noise is a single course meal,
Where people are trying to stab you
possibly, or poison you,
or shoot you.
or shoot you.
Um, I have to ask you about Eragon. Because everybody watching wants to know a little bit about Eragon.
Yeah.
So the 20th anniversary is coming up this year.
Yep.
Is there anything that you can share other than the 20th anniversary edition about the TV show and when we could possibly start looking for that on our streaming services? I have to
Uh,
ask.
I can't really say anything more about the TV show.
That's
Um,
okay.
if I did at this point, I have a feeling my film agents would literally like teleport from California to hit me over the head with a script. It's very much alive, the project. As for Eragon, well, what I can say is this: Murtagh is a direct inline sequel with the rest of the inheritance cycle. So I I know I've been sort of talking about book 5 for years. Okay, Murtagh is not book 5 actually. Um, I was working on plotting out and working some details out of book 5. Was it about a year and a half ago? And I realized that there was just too much stuff I needed to establish before I could write book 5. So I went and wrote Murtagh. So now book 5 is book 6, or something like that. Uh, but Murtagh is a full-sized direct line entry into the world of Eragon, and I hope people feel it does the character justice. He does not have an easy time in the book, but who would expect that for Murtagh in any case? After Murtagh, well, Murtagh is also setting the stage for a whole bunch of other stories I want to tell in this world, but it's also its own self-contained story as well. So, you're not going to be left massively hanging. And my plan is just to bounce back and forth between World of Eragon and the Fractalverse, back and forth, right up until I have to work on the television show, and then hopefully that doesn't take so much time that I can't continue to work on books at the same time, which it certainly could. That's we've seen that with certain authors. You get a television show, it gets very hard to find time to work on other things. But fortunately, the inheritance cycle is finished. So,
No shade, George. Just
uh,
actually a little shade, George.
it helps that it's finished. It helps
Yeah.
that it's finished. But I have no intention of letting like a massive break happen again. I love writing in that world. I love writing in the Fractalverse. So, between the two, I have enough variety that I don't get bored, and I'm very satisfied creatively.
Are you able to talk a little bit about your next Fractalverse book, or do I have to just sit on that?
No, we can. I hinted at this before. So I have a couple of Fractalverse novels I'm debating about which one I want to write next. Some of them are there's one big one that's a direct sequel to Sleep in a Sea of Stars, and I wish I could tell you the title because it's amazing. I'll tell you after we're done
Okay.
interviewing. But so I have a couple that are like direct sequels to Sleep. But one of the ones I actually want to write is actually a YA steampunk that's set on Earth in like the early 1900s. There's a Zeppelin. Let's put it this way: there's a Zeppelin in it, and I've always wanted to write about a Zeppelin. So
Now you have to tell me, will this steampunk novel kind of like set the stage for what will become like
oh
early
yes,
faster than light travel? Is that like kind
not
of
not faster than light travel, but it ties into some other things that are going on in the
oh, cool?
Fractalverse.
Because everything's
There,
happening at the same time, technically, right?
yeah, and this will be we'll might actually see some ancestors of characters who show up later on. I'm doing something in the Fractalverse that is not obvious yet and will not become obvious until I write 2 more books after To Sleep. And so I really want to write those because there's something else going on in this universe, and anyway, yeah,
Is it a
so there's
multiverse? Is this a
no
Loki situation?
no
Okay.
no
No.
multiverse. I hate
Okay.
multiverses.
I have to ask.
Yeah, no multiverse. So people can rest assured, no multiverse.
That's actually very good information for folks, depending on their
Yeah,
feelings about multiverses.
multiverse just kind of destroys the idea of a consistent timeline or a consistent setting because, it depends on what type of multiverse you have. But in a lot of them, anything's possible if you go through enough types of variation of the verse, and then it's like, well, it removes any restrictions. And I find that the more restrictions I have, it leads to some more creativity.
Yeah, that makes sense. You had mentioned, by the way, you took quite a big amount of time off between Inheritance and writing anything else in the
Yeah.
Eragon world. Um, I know that at the time we had talked about it and you were writing To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, or at least developing that story.
Hmm.
Um, do you feel like that break was good for you? That it made you a little bit more creative? Did you go back and reread the whole series before you tackled Murtagh?
Well, so I did the Fork, the Witch, and the Worm,
Yes.
that came out end of 2018, 2019. So that was my first little dipping of the toes back in the world of Eragon. But I have to admit, I did not go back and reread the books. I winged it entirely on memory, uh, which
Wow.
which perhaps was a little foolish. But I had a couple of early readers of mine, including my amazing assistant Emanuela, who has combed through the inheritance cycle more times than I can count because she has built me a personal wiki based off of my work. And I had her read through the book, of course, and she caught one or two small things, but nothing else. So, I mean, remember, I spent a lot of my formative years working on the inheritance cycle. I mean, it was 98 until 2011. So I would have to go a very long time to really forget anything major. I'm not infallible. I certainly forget things at times, but it's pretty deep in my brain.
That's remarkable. It's not very often that you find an author so immersed in their own work like that.
I mean, it's my life.
It's your life.
It's my
It's your
life.
legacy.
It's my legacy. Yeah. So, and again, I think the only thing I'm concerned about, and there's nothing I can do about this, it is what it is that given that my writing style has changed over the years, I've learned a lot. I'm a different person. Um, Hopefully, Murtagh still feels like Murtagh to readers, especially since we're in his head now, which we've never been in his head before. That's my main thing. I hope Murtagh still feels like Murtagh to readers.
I'm pretty confident that it will, and I say that because I've read your work for years now, and while your most recent stuff isn't like Eragon, when I picked up Fractal Noise, I could tell that it was your voice writing
Mm.
because it kinda had that same tone of hopefulness.
Aw. It's really nice to hear you say that because I was really worried that Fractal Noise was going to be too grim for anyone to enjoy it, quite honestly. That's why I didn't release it back in 2014 or so. I mean, because the first draft was 2013.
Now, I think that this particular novel shows that you can have terrible, awful things happen to you and still be able to find hope and light and love and meaning
Mhm.
in the things that you do, and I don't think that there's anything dark about that.
I mean, what's the alternative, right? It's that to me is the ultimate thing is like what's the alternative? And we all know what the alternative is, and sometimes that's the choice people make, but I think that is not the choice for me, nor do I think it should be the choice for most people.
And it certainly isn't the choice for most of your characters.
No, no. And that's also why I'm so optimistic and hopeful about exploring space and humanity getting off Earth, because if we stay on Earth in a long enough time frame, whether it's an asteroid or the sun in about 3 billion years boiling off the oceans and then in about 4 billion years expanding and swallowing the Earth, that's it. And if we care about the plant life and the animal life on this planet, we are their only hope um, to survive past this planet. So ultimately, we have to get off Earth and spread out into the universe. And I am convinced we will, because humanity is not one to just lay down and say, "I give up."
You're right, as bad as things might feel,
Yeah.
especially lately.
You
Um,
know, you know that that okay. Look, I've
okay.
I've read a lot of history, but one of the things I've done is I've watched way too many movies in my life because my family and I had no television reception growing up, so we watched a movie every night. I mean, we were one of the first subscribers to Netflix back when it was a DVD direct mail service. Okay,
I remember.
we got everything at Blockbuster back when that was a thing. Anyway, I've seen an enormous amount of movies and I've seen an enormous amount of old movies. And people, I mean, it always shocks me when people talk about a movie from 10 years ago or the 90s as an old movie. No, no, let's go back to the 1920s and 30s and 40s and talk about old movies. I've seen in so many movies going through World War II, and not just from the US, from all around the world. And you want to talk about bad. You want to talk about how tough things were. I mean, it must have felt like the world was ending during World War II. And you know what? People got through it. Not everyone got through it, but most of us got through it. And, um, that's, times are often hard. Times have been horrible in the past and will be horrible again in the future. And yet here we are. And we are here because our ancestors were either lucky enough, tough enough, or whatever to survive, but they chose to survive. They chose to have children. They chose to help
Hope.
make sure that we're here. Yeah. So anyway, rant over.
I don't disagree with you. I think that humans are ultimately good, and I think that we are the most resilient creatures.
Yeah. Well, and we also have a lot of evil in us too. I mean, we are squabbly, jealous monkeys who like to throw poo at each other. So, we have a lot of problems also, but knowing that, we can strive to be better and strive to, improve and build a future that we can all exist in.
I think that's why you're a storyteller, and everybody here likes to read. We're always looking for that hopeful, happily ever after sort of ending, aren't we?
Yeah. Or that or the bittersweet ending too. I love bittersweet endings because to me they're the most true to life. But I cannot bear the completely nihilistic down endings. That just life's tough enough. Why put ourselves through that in our fiction as well?
Exactly. So for everybody watching, yes, this is a thriller. Yes, it's heart-pounding. Ultimately, it's an ending.
Well,
It's not a
it's
bad one.
yeah, it is an ending.
Now everybody in the comments are gonna be like, "Jordan, why? Why did you tease us like that?" Oh my goodness. I do have a live question that somebody has been asking a lot, and I
Yeah.
know the likely answer, but I'm going to ask just for the sake of their getting an answer. Regarding auditions for the Eragon TV show, is it safe to assume we can have auditions before the end of next year?
I would hope so. But it's out of my control. Once auditions are uh, in progress, they'll be announced in all the usual trade places that Disney would announce any other casting information for any of their shows. So that's where you would be looking, and if you have an agent, I'm sure they can help you with that as well.
Awesome. Hopefully that answered their question.
Hopefully.
And you are a producer on the show?
Yes. So I will be producing. I mean, there will be other producers, but I will be producing and co-writing along with whoever is the showrunner of the show,
Whoever that may be.
whoever
Hopefully
that may be.
someone fantastic.
Yes. Well, it's a difficult position to fill because it's a big budget show. I mean, like you can't do this on a shoestring. You can't have Saphira the dragon and battles and whatnot on a shoestring. So you have to find there's a very small subset of people who are qualified for the position. Add on to that, also they need to be available because people with those skill sets are in high demand. So they need to be available. They have to be interested in the property, and then they have to be a good match. That person and I need to be a good match creatively. So that's what we're looking for. And as soon as we have news on that front, we will announce it.
And I think that your readers are really going to appreciate you having a hand in it this time around because it's going to show a respect for the material that everybody really loves.
I hope so. I mean, I have to temper expectations a little bit. A lot of this is going to be out of my hands, even being deep in the process. The directors will make choices, the actors will make choices, Disney will make choices. But that said, I will do everything in my power to try to make it something special. that's what I try to do with my writing. Even if I'm writing about something that, classic hero story, a boy and a dragon and a magic sword and a wise old mentor and an evil king, I still gave it all my all in writing that. And I will attempt to do the same with the television show.
I know you will. And it must be crazy to think that people are going to be reading Eragon for hundreds of years. Hey, maybe someday from space.
Well, I don't know about hundreds of years. I'll settle for the rest of my life. After that, it's AC time. So right now we're DC. Used to be BC. You
I
know,
like that.
once we're into after Christopher, it doesn't matter.
No, why should it? You had mentioned that you're going on tour.
Yes, I leave. Actually, I leave on Monday. My tour starts on Tuesday in New York City. All of the information is on my website, paolini.net, as well as fractalverse.net. And it's been posted on my social media as well. I think it's pinned up on there. You can check it out. I'm going to be touring for about 2 weeks, and I'm going around the eastern side of the US and a bit on the west side. And then I will also be touring in November for Murtagh. I'll be doing the US, and then I think I'm going to pop up to Canada for one or two places.
Toronto?
Yeah, I think Toronto.
Then I'll see you there.
Oh, there we go. And I'll also most likely be hopping over to the UK and Europe December, January, depending on what the publishers want to do.
Awesome. I can't wait to meet you.
Well,
When
I
would that
feel
be?
like we've already met.
I know. Maybe I'll bring one of my tiny mics and I'll ask you a couple of questions.
Man on the street style.
Exactly. I did that for Y'all West, and it was a lot of fun, actually.
Nice.
It
Nice.
ended up on our OwlCrate TikToks.
Ah,
Speaking of TikTok, you also have a TikTok. Where can folks follow you?
I have no idea. I don't run the TikTok.
You don't?
Well, I
That's fun.
record. My wonderful assistants are the ones who post the videos. So I think it's just at Paolini or at Christopher Paolini. If you search Christopher Paolini, the profile will pop right up. But yes, we're trying to put out content as consistently as we can. Things have been a little slow recently because I have been absolute nose to the grindstone getting through the last round of edits for Murtagh, which I'm not quite through, which means I'm actually going to be editing on book tour, which is
Ooh,
something
okay.
I've never done before. Although I remember going to Comic-Con years ago when Brandon Sanderson was still working on Wheel of Time, and we had an event together. We had dinner or something, and then I invited him, like we could go somewhere else, and he was like, "Oh, I got to go back to my hotel room and write another chapter," because he was on a crazy deadline for that Wheel of Time book. I don't even think it was the last book. I think it was the second to last. So that's going to be me on this tour. It's going to do my events, and then I'm going to be editing in the hotel room and editing on the airplane and editing in the car. Well, not in the cars, but you get the idea.
I do. It's gonna be
Um,
quite a busy time for you.
and if anyone wants to come to the events, I'm happy to sign not just Fractalverse books, but also the Inheritance Cycle. And I'm thinking, don't tell my editor this, but I might do a tiny little reading for Murtagh at some of the events, just to tease people a little bit.
I think you should. I'm not gonna tell anyone. I've kept your secrets very well,
Yes, you have. Yes, you have.
especially since I'm known as the Tom Holland of OwlCrate.
Ah, well, it's a good thing that this is a private conversation and no one just heard what I said. So
No one heard it.
yeah.
Not a soul. Christopher, if nobody can meet you on tour and they're stuck at home or they're in a different country, where can they find signed copies of your books?
There is a bookstore called Conley's Books and Music in Livingston, Montana. And if you search for that on Google, I have a relationship with them. I go in and I sign books on occasion, and you can order from them. Also, you can always send me a book via the fan mail address I have on paolini.net. The only thing I would ask is if you send a book, please include return shipping. And I also have signed copies of To Sleep in a Sea of Stars available on my Etsy store, along with a lot of other cool merch, art prints for the Fractalverse, maps and stuff for World of Eragon, pins, shirts, the usual stuff. So
Officially licensed stuff. Very cool.
officially licensed. What I can do given the constraints of the contract with Disney. So,
Fair enough.
if there's one thing Disney is good at, it's scooping up merch rights.
Oh, they're very good at that,
Yeah,
and I was
so
recently at Disneyland.
if the
The merch is
Eragon television
fantastic.
if the Eragon television show happens, we're gonna get like crazy Eragon merch, I'm sure. It'll be everywhere.
You know what I want? I want the Mickey ears.
Mm.
I want Eragon Mickey ears for the parks.
I want Saphira horns.
Oh, that would be so cool. Alright, we'll have to put in a request, not that Disney will pay attention.
Uh,
Christopher, will you come back and chat with me about Murtagh when it releases?
Absolutely. It would be a
Awesome.
pleasure.
So everybody has that to look forward to. Christopher, thank you so much for joining me this evening to
My
talk about
pleasure.
Fractal Noise and stuff. And thank you to the Nest and Words and Whimsy and all the OwlCrate folks who are watching. Our next author chat is happening on Tuesday, May 16th at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when I will be talking with debut author Christopher Hartland about his novel Against the Stars. And please don't miss all of the other events that are happening here in the Nest this May. We're bringing you live chats with Amy Kaufman, Robin Alvarez, and Jason June. So kick back, relax, and join us most Fridays and weekends for live author chats with some of your favorite authors. Have a great night, everybody.